A delicious golden and flaky tapada de berenjena con queso, an eggplant and cheese borreca pie that is easy to put together and I know you're going to love. Sally that girl in the kitchen. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sally That Girl in the Kitchen. In today's episode, I'm going to teach you how to make a tapada de berenjena con queso. Yes, an eggplant and cheese borreca pie. So, if you've watched my channel before, you'll know that I love to make tapadas. What is a tapada? Well, it's a Sephardic-Turkish delicacy where we use the dough that we would use to make a borreca, our homemade borreca dough, and we make a pie out of it. So instead of having to shape the borrecas one by one, we would make a tapada and then we just slice it in squares or in slices, depending on the type of baking dish you're using, and we serve it. And it is so absolutely delicious. It's just as yummy as making a borreca, but it's a little more convenient because you don't have to shape them one by one, just bake it up into a pie, and it is divine. So as you probably have noticed, Sephardic Turkish people love eggplant. It is something that we grew up eating, and it was something that our ancestors ate in Turkey, and so we make so many different dishes using eggplant. So I will be sure to link a few of those in the description of this video because I have other amazing, yummy, delicious eggplant recipes already up, such as my Almodrote de Berenjena, which I know has been a huge hit. So that one I'll definitely link. And of course, I'll link some borrequitas and some other things in the description. So be sure to check those out too. So I am super excited to get started on making this tapada. So let's not wait another second and let's get started. For the filling part of today's recipe, you will need 2 large eggplants, extra virgin olive oil for drizzling, some salt for sprinkling, ground pepper to taste. I'm using tricolor peppercorns, but you can use black or tricolor, 1 pound of feta cheese, 1.5 cups of shredded parmesan cheese, and 3 large eggs. And for the dough part of today's recipe, you will need 3 3/4 cups of all-purpose flour, 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt, 3/4 of a cup of vegetable oil, 3/4 of a cup of water, and 1 egg that we're going to be using for an egg wash, and some nonstick cooking spray. You will also need a long, thin knife, a serving spoon, a serving fork, 2 regular forks, 2 small bowls, a pastry brush, a couple of wet measuring cups, some dry measuring cups, some measuring spoons, some oven mitts, a standard rectangular baking dish. I'll be using a Pyrex, some aluminum foil and some wax paper, a medium-sized bowl, a rolling pin, a baking tray, a cutting board, and a knife. And you'll also need 2 large bowls, one of which should have a cover, or you can use some plastic wrap or a dough cover instead. So now that we have all of our ingredients and tools together, let's get started. So the first thing you're going to want to do is preheat your oven to 350 degrees, making sure you have a rack placed in the center. Then we're going to work on our eggplant. So grab your eggplants and a cutting board and a knife. And what you're going to do is you're going to cut off the top end and just a little touch from the bottom end. And that flat bottom will help us cut down the center and divide our eggplant into 2 halves. Then you're going to grab your long, thin knife, and with it, we're going to score each half of our eggplant in a crisscross pattern. This is going to help release the flesh of our eggplant, and it's going to help our olive oil and our seasonings seep through as we are partially roasting this eggplant and getting it ready to make our filling. So once we've scored both halves, you're just going to drizzle some good quality extra virgin olive oil on top of each half, and then you can see how quickly it gets absorbed by the eggplant. Eggplant is like a sponge. It's really going to just suck that olive oil in. So you want to make sure to coat both halves well, and then you're just going to grab a little touch of salt and just give it a little pinch on each half of your eggplant. And then once you've added some salt, then I like to grind some freshly ground pepper. I'm using tricolor peppercorns, or you can just do a little pinch of ground pepper if that's what you have. That's fine. Then I'm going to place these face down on a tray that I've covered with aluminum foil, and I'm going to repeat the process with the second eggplant. And then I'm going to go ahead and place those two also face down, and I'm going to grab a fork, and then I'm going to carefully pierce the flesh on each of these eggplant halves so that as they roast face down, they can release some steam. So once I've pierced all four halves, then I'm going to pop these into the oven on a center rack, and I'm going to set a 30-minute timer to partially roast these. Now, while those are roasting, I'm going to add my flour to a bowl, and to that, I'm going to add my salt, and then I'm going to use my trusty fork. Sorry, I had a little flour on my hands. And then I'm just going to stir that salt into the flour to make sure it is very well incorporated, because I really want it nicely distributed amongst my flour. And then once I've done that, I bring over my oil, which I've measured out, and I add it right on top of the flour and salt mixture. And then I use my fork to just scrape down the sides of the bowl and bring that flour in. And then I use the sides of the fork to kind of cut the mixture to help me form what I like to call sandy pebbles. The mixture resembles sandy pebbles, for lack of a better explanation. So now it's important to note that your mixture should look like this. In other words, there shouldn't be dry flour showing. It should have taken on this color and this texture. If it feels a little dry, because maybe you went a little heavy-handed with your flour, you can add a half a teaspoon at a time of oil until you achieve this texture before moving forward with the rest of the ingredients. Just don't overdo it. Just a little touch at a time until you get to this texture. And so once you have, then you're going to measure out your water, warm it up in the microwave. I put it in for about 40 seconds. I want it lukewarm. I don't want it super hot. And then I'm going to pour it right on top of this mixture. And then once again, I'm going to use my fork and I'm going to stir the water in. And I'm going to use the sides of my fork and the back of my fork to help incorporate the water into this mixture. And you're going to see how very quickly the mixture starts to absorb the water, and it's going to become the most beautiful dough. This dough is so supple and just so beautiful to work with. So what I do is I clean off my fork and I switch to my hands once I see that the mixture has started to come together. And then I just kind of fold the dough over onto itself, and you're gonna see how quickly we've formed our dough. I'm just using the dough to clean off any little remnants on my bowl. And this dough is pretty much ready to go. It came together in a snap. It's beautiful, it's soft, it is so amazing to work with. That's it, our dough is ready. All that's left to do now is to let our dough rest. So I make it into the shape of a ball, and then I cover it, either with a cover, some plastic wrap, a dough cover, whatever you have on hand, and just let it sit on the counter while we continue to prepare our eggplant filling. So now, our eggplant is ready. We've pulled it out of the oven. And what we're going to do is we're going to just flip these guys over. I'm just using a fork and a serving spoon. And I'm going to turn all four halves over, and I'm going to let them cool just a touch, just enough so that I can handle them. You don't want to grab them when they're super hot. And so while that's resting a bit and cooling, I've measured out my pounds of feta, and then I've crumbled it by hand. You can, of course, buy this crumbled, but I just love a good quality feta cheese. I love to buy it in block form, and it takes 2 seconds to just crumble it up by hand. And then I went ahead and I measured out my shredded parmesan, which that I just buy shredded for convenience. That's perfectly fine. So now my eggplants have started to cool down, and they're kind of cool enough to touch. Yes, I'm a little impatient and they're still a little warm, but all I've done is put it right in the bowl, and I'm just using my serving spoon to scoop out the flesh, and then I'm just removing the peel. And I'm going to repeat that process for all 4 halves, and I'm just going to scoop out all of that yummy flesh that's been infused with olive oil and we seasoned before roasting. And now that I've removed the flesh from all 4 pieces, I'm just grabbing a fork and knife, and I'm just cutting up that flesh, and then using the back of the fork to kind of smush up that flesh a bit. And then once I've done that, I bring over my bowl with my beautiful crumbled feta, and I'm going to add all of that right in. And then, yep, you guessed it, I'm just going to bring over the Parmesan cheese and just add that right on top. And then I'm just going to use my spoon and incorporate the cheeses into the eggplant until it's well incorporated. Now you'll notice I haven't added the eggs because since I'm using feta and parm, they're both salty. I'm going to taste this, see if it needs any salt, because the type of cheeses I'm using are already fairly salty, the feta especially. So I want to taste it. Yes, it's actually delicious and it's perfect. It doesn't need any salt at all. But I will mention, you can make this tapada using the different cheeses that I use in my Almodrote de Berenjena instead. So if you want to fill this with that eggplant filling instead, you can also do that. So whatever cheeses you're using, you're just going to want to taste it before adding any additional salt. And of course, you can even bake this mixture crustless, and it would be a delicious almodrote with feta and parm. So now I'm going to crack 3 eggs into a bowl. I'm going to beat them well, and now I'm going to just add them right in, and then I'm going to mix them and incorporate them well into our beautiful eggplant and cheese mixture. This is why I left the eggs for last, because that way we could taste our filling and see if it needed any salt before adding in the raw egg, because nobody wants to have to taste the mixture with raw egg in it. So now that we've incorporated the eggs well, and they will serve as a binder and give our mixture a beautiful texture, we're going to work on dividing our dough. So we're just going to uncover it. It's rested, it's ready to go, and we're going to use a long, thin knife, and we're going to split our dough into 2 halves. Then we're going to bring over our rectangular baking dish, and we're going to give it a spray with non-stick cooking spray. It's going to really help our tapada come out really easily from the mold. And so now what I like to do is I tear a long piece of wax paper and I place it on my counter, and then I take half of my dough and I place it on the center of that piece of wax paper, and then I just use my hand and I flatten the dough out a bit, and then I add a second sheet of wax paper on top. Then I use my hand to stretch out my dough as much as I can by hand. And then once I've stretched it, then I grab my rolling pin, and then I use the rolling pin to roll the dough out. So you want it as big as your Pyrex plus a little more, because you do want it to go up the sides of the inside of your Pyrex. So then when it's big enough, you just peel off that first layer of wax paper, flip it over into your baking dish, and then carefully remove the other sheet of wax paper so that you've now lined the entire inside of your baking dish. And then I just use my fingers and just help cover the sides of the inside of my baking dish. And then of course you're going to have some excess, so you're just going to use a long thin knife and you're going to trim off any excess dough. And then what you can do is if you have an area that needs a little more dough, then just patch it on. This dough is incredibly malleable. It's like working with Play-Doh. It's amazing to work with, and look how gorgeous it looks. I love the streaks that are formed. It looks so beautiful. So now we've lined the inside of our baking dish, and all we're doing is bringing over that delicious eggplant and cheese filling and spreading it all over this beautiful layer of dough. You just want a nice, even layer of filling. And then, of course, we're going to work on our top layer of dough. So we're just repeating the same process. Wax paper, dough, flatten it out a bit with your hand, another sheet of wax paper on top, roll it out until it's nice and big with your rolling pin. You want a nice thin layer. Then you're just going to peel off the top layer of wax paper, and just like before, you're going to bring it over and just flip it right onto your baking dish, and then you're carefully going to peel off that second sheet of wax paper, and then you're going to have a beautiful cover to your tapada. Tapada actually means covered. That's what it literally translates to mean into English. And then all I'm doing is I'm using a knife and once again just removing any excess dough so that I have a really smooth edge on my tapada. And then I'm going to come in with my finger and I'm going to make a little design all the way around. It just kind of gives it a little scalloped edge, a little pretty edge because we do eat with our eyes first. So notice I am just going around using either my middle finger or my thumb or my index finger and just pressing the dough up against the pan so that we end up with a cute little edge to our tapada, and it's just gonna look beautiful, and of course it's gonna taste absolutely delicious. So now I've gone all the way around, just cleaned off the edges of my pan, make sure everything looks nice and pretty, and I do have a little excess dough, so I'm not gonna throw this out. I can make a borreca, I can stuff it with some cheese and guava, some ground beef, whatever I have in my fridge, and make myself a little borrequita, so that's going in my fridge for later. And then I'm just gonna crack an egg in a bowl and add a touch of water to it. And then I'm gonna beat it well because this I'm gonna use for an egg wash. But before I apply the egg wash, I'm gonna cut some vents into the top layer of dough because these vents will allow some steam to escape while our beautiful tapada bakes. So once you cut the vents in, then you're gonna come in with your pastry brush and that mixture of egg with a touch of water, and you're just going to paint the entire top of this beautiful tapada de berenjena. This is gonna be so crazy good, and by doing this, you're gonna get a golden, beautiful top. It's gonna really give it a pretty color. So once I've done that, I like to come in again with my knife, and I like to open those vents. I wanna make sure the slits are open because I do want this to be able to vent while it bakes, and the egg sometimes clogs up those slits. So I just like to come in one more time and give them just a little touch with my knife to make sure the slits are open. And look at how pretty this guy looks. It's not even baked yet, and it just looks so beautiful. That dough is just perfection, and that filling is so delicious. You are gonna love this. So now it's ready to go in the oven. I'm gonna pop it in on a center rack, and I'm gonna set a 40-minute timer to allow it to bake. And after 40 minutes, it smells incredible. It is golden and gorgeous, and it just has that beautiful crusty little edge. You see, we took the time to just scallop the edge, and it's just going to be so tasty and crispy and perfect. It just looks amazing, and it smells so good. That cheesy eggplant smell is just all over my kitchen. It is so delicious, and look how beautiful this is. Tell me this is not perfect to serve anytime. Beautiful for a brunch, just any occasion. It's gorgeous, it's special, and it's different. It's likely something a lot of people haven't had before, And you saw the dough is super easy to make, and look how gorgeous it turns out. And wait till you taste this. It is divine. So, as I like to say, enough with the admiring. It's time to taste this guy. I have cut it into squares, and I have served myself a corner piece, which is my favorite because I get all that yummy crust. And of course, I've hardly let this cool down, so the filling is still soft and moist and delicious. It will firm up as it sits, but I actually just love it just like this, nice and warm right out of the oven. It's perfect, and it's actually delicious cold too. That crust and that delicious filling just firm up, and it's delicious no matter how you serve it. So here we go. I cannot wait to take a bite of this. Look at how amazing that crust is, so flaky, and that filling of eggplant and cheeses. You can see the little pieces of feta running throughout. Wow, does this look good? So delicious. It is perfect. It's got that beautiful contrast of that crispy, beautiful golden exterior with that almost creamy eggplant interior. It is so tasty, and the combination of textures is just absolutely delicious. Yum, yum, yum. It is so crazy good. And look at how flaky the crust is. It just flakes off. So tasty and crispy. Look at that beautiful golden edge. Yummy, yummy, yummy. I love this so much. And of course, the eggplant, feta, and parm filling. Wow. So tasty, so yummy, different, and absolutely delicious. So good. So tell me, how crazy good does this tapada look? It is so yummy. It's really one of my favorites. And the truth is that even people that don't love eggplant will try this tapada and will not believe how absolutely delicious it is and how much they really do like it. The same goes for my almodrote. People that don't eat eggplant love my almodrote, which I know makes no sense, but just the combination of the cheeses and the egg and the eggplant just make it absolutely yummy. And of course, the same goes for this tapada de berenjena con queso, this eggplant and cheese borreca pie. Everyone who tries it loves it. Trust me. No, better yet, don't trust me. You're gonna have to try to make this recipe yourself. And of course, if you've enjoyed today's recipe, don't forget to like it, to write a sweet comment, and of course to share it with your friends. Thank you so much for sharing my channel with your friends. That really helps me grow. So thank you so much for sending it to your friends. When you discover it for yourself, share the love the same way I do with you. So definitely share my channel link. And of course, if you're not already subscribed to my channel here on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to Sally That Girl in the Kitchen and to touch that little notification bell so that you get notified every time I put up a new delicious recipe, which I do all of the time. I make all kinds of recipes from around the world, even though you all know that my heart lives in my Sephardic-Turkish recipes. And of course, explore under my video tab, under my playlist tab, and you're gonna find there's so many yummy recipes I know you're gonna love. And of course, if you're not already following me on social media, be sure to follow Sally That Girl in the Kitchen on Facebook, Instagram, and on Pinterest. And you can also find me as Sally That Girl FL on Twitter, Snapchat, and on TikTok. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Sally That Girl in the Kitchen.